The Pine and Oak podcast with Alon, Pinkas and Amir, Oren is being created at the Procast studios in Tel Aviv. Procast is a leading podcast house dealing with commercial as well as public interest issues in Israel and in the region. Hi, this is the first and hopefully not the last edition of the Pine and Oak podcast, which is being taped in the Procast studios in southern Tel Aviv. And I'm one of the two co-hosts, Amir, Oren. Welcome, my friend and partner, Alon, Pinkas.
Good to be with you, Amir, for all 470 episodes.
Thank you very much. And we decided, at least on a temporary basis, to call our podcast the Pine and Oak, which may bring shades of some dreary pub in a suburb of London. But this is just a play on our Hebrew names, which happen to be those of several trees of the pine and the oak. This is not, as you, Alon, mentioned, this is not the journal of the U.S. Forest Service. We are more akin to Forrest Gump.
Much more.
If at all. And our purpose here, before we start selling merchandise, tote bags and T-shirts and all with our brand, is to consider the issues of the day or the week as they pertain to the American-Israeli scene. And you, Alon, not only were you educated in the States, you also worked for Israeli foreign ministers, one of whom became, or two of them became prime ministers too. And you have been the consul general of Israel earlier this century in New York. Let me ask you first, this has been the Super Bowl week. And one suspects that you are or used to be a fan of the Philadelphia Eagles, weren't you?
No. I'm a childhood New York Giants fan.
But you grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia.
You're confusing me with a certain prime minister, a certain incumbent prime minister, who, yes, grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, but has no idea about football.
Weren't your father in a similar consular capacity in Philadelphia?
No, in New York.
In New York, but he used to, for some time, he used to call from Philadelphia.
That is true. He later on, when I was already in the army serving in the IDF, he used to go to Philadelphia to give series of lectures, and that kept him there for a month or 2 months at a time. And in that capacity, he befriended the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, who sent as a tribute a Philadelphia Eagles T-shirt, and I sent back a photo of myself on top of a tank on the outskirts of Beirut wearing a Philadelphia Eagles T-shirt, but that's my only and last connection to the Eagles.
So that explains the phrase "where Eagles dare," and
or the Philadelphia corridor.
That's true. And there was this movie, Silver Linings Playbook, with Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence and Robert De Niro, and the watchword there is optimism. How optimistic are you now that we are into the first several weeks of Donald Trump's second presidency, that Israel will get out of its morass, its quagmire in Gaza?
Not optimistic at all. But to be honest, Amir, I've dispensed with those terms pessimism and optimism in favor. I know it's a cliche, realism. I just look at the structure of the relationship. I look at the protagonists, at the personalities involved, which is nothing to cheer about. And I just have no room for optimism. On the other hand, it's not necessarily all pessimistic. Israel, with all due respect to Mr. Trump and his good or bad intentions, his good or bad ideas, Israel's predicament is a result of one person, and that is Mr. Netanyahu. That has nothing to do with Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Barack Obama or the president in 2028. It's all about Netanyahu, which is why I'm not optimistic.
You used to work with and therefore intimately know Shimon Peres, Ehud Barak, Shlomo Ben-Ami, David Levy. What was your impression at that time of Netanyahu, who was, as a politician, a rival of these four figures?
Well, if I look at it chronologically, when I worked with Peres, Netanyahu was chairman of Likud. This is 1992, 93, 94, after Shamir had lost the 92 elections to Yitzhak Rabin. Peres became foreign minister.
And Shamir resigned as leader of the Likud rather than compete for staying there. And his close protege, Moshe Arens, who used to be Netanyahu's mentor, decided not to run, thereby opening the way for Netanyahu.
Exactly, but it's important to our listeners to also know that Yitzhak Shamir, a name that many of them have probably forgotten, Yitzhak Shamir despised Netanyahu, disrespected Netanyahu, did not take him seriously. Whether he was right or wrong, I leave that to everyone's judgment. But at the time, I had no opinion of Netanyahu. I knew Netanyahu very vaguely from his time in Washington as the number 2 at the embassy, a period that you remember very well, better than I for sure. And then as ambassador to the UN, he made no lasting impression on me.
You went to school there, to graduate school at Georgetown University, and you were also affiliated with the Defense Attaché's office.
I was assistant defense attaché, which the Americans thought was a Mossad thing, but all I did was tag along with Major General Amos Yaron to meetings and explain to him what was said.
Come on, Alon. So many years have passed. You can now tell us the truth.
No, nothing to do with Mossad. I was a graduate student trying to make payments on the rental apartment in a building that you know well.
But one of your students was a Jordanian prince.
Yes, a Jordanian prince who wasn't sure that he had a future in politics. His name is Abdullah bin al-Hussein, now known as King Abdullah II of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. He was one of my students at a course in which I was the teaching assistant, and the course was taught by Madeleine Albright. And he was a very good student. At the time, Hussein was in relative good health. As the years progressed and Hussein became ill with cancer, the assumption all over was that his brother, Hassan, Crown Prince Hassan, will become the king.
Especially Hassan's assumption.
Assumption.
But he assumed that, but he did not assume the...
Right. And then they had some social, economic unrest in
Jordan.
In Jordan when Hussein was hospitalized in Rochester, Minnesota. I went to visit him with Ehud Barak, if we're
at the Mayo Clinic.
At the Mayo Clinic. Shlomo Ben-Ami was there, Yossi Beilin was there, Ehud Barak was there, and little me. And then Abdullah became the heir apparent, and Hussein had died, and Abdullah became the king.
Did you keep up in correspondence, or?
I went to Amman with Ehud Barak, with which I started working at the time. And once or twice I approached Abdullah, but for him it was, he's the king now, and I was his teaching assistant. So I was advised very politely.
Was he the teacher's pet?
No. By the way, he wrote he was a graduate student. Most of the students in that class were undergraduates. He was a graduate, so it was a combined class. He wrote a very interesting paper about the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces reprisal attacks in 1968 and 69, particularly 68, across the Jordan River into Jordan against Fatah, which was entrenched in Jordan until Black September 1970.
Also, the Iraqi forces were there.
Yes. And at the time, Israel conducted several across-the-border incursions. Forget the names of the places. They mean nothing to 99% of whomever is listening to us. But he wrote a paper justifying Israel, even at the cost of encroaching on Jordan's sovereignty. He said that Israel had no choice, that Fatah became a semi-sovereign, quasi-sovereign state within a state, that September 1970 was later justified, but the basis of that justification was Israel's incursion.
And the time of writing this was 20 years later, in the late 80s.
He wrote this in 1989. I read this. I gave him an A. I consulted with another professor to see that I'm not biased in any way. And that professor, the late Avner Yaniv, Professor Avner Yaniv, he was teaching as a guest scholar at Georgetown. And I gave him an A. And I reminded him of that A years later, but he wasn't impressed. He was already the king.
Yes, it's good to be the king.
It's good to be the king.
So back to Netanyahu.
Yeah.
You say that at that time, early 90s, when Netanyahu was, after his first years in politics, a mere deputy minister.
Right.
Netanyahu has never been a full minister before he won the prime ministership.
That's true, but everyone needs to remember that as deputy foreign minister, he was designated as a persona non grata, although it lasted just for 3 days. He was designated as a persona non grata by then Secretary of State James Baker III, a Republican, after giving a speech or telling some reporters that the American foreign policy in the Middle East is clueless and based on false assumptions. And James Baker, the Secretary of State Baker, said that he should not set foot in the State Department. 3 days later, he
Recanted, but
allowed only desk managers to meet him, not assistant or
but
deputy minister.
It's interesting, this episode, because Netanyahu, once in politics, and even before, when he was in Washington and then New York and trying to make inroads into the American and especially Jewish American community, seeking donors and supporters, tried to forge an alliance between the Likud party and the Republican party. And Baker, in the Bush presidency, was a Republican.
He was a Republican, but he was a Republican of the old school, an establishment Republican, a very indifferent Republican in terms of
what Trump would now call a rhino, a Republican in name only.
Trump would now call a deep state Republican, a rogue Republican, a rhino for sure. James Baker, people like John McCain, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Bush father, Bush son. These people cannot get elected in today's Republican Party. But there was another important episode. So Netanyahu becomes the head of the Likud party, and I still don't know him. I mean, I know of him. But then he starts with his incendiary and incitement against the Oslo Accords. At the time, I'm working with Peres. More or less at that time, I left Peres' office, but that doesn't matter. I'm not the
A footnote, even though, of course, this comes later. Once he won in 1996 against Peres, he told his supporters that he is now for Oslo, he is for continuity he will do it with an accent on security and reciprocity. But not only is he now going to follow Rabin and Peres in the Oslo process, he wouldn't have won the elections had he been against Oslo. Now, 30 years later, he's trying to make us forget it, but not all of us are in the forgetting business.
We can always relitigate what happened in 1996. He should not have won. He should not have won, but there was only one candidate in Israel, in the world indeed, against whom he could have won, and that was Shimon Peres. After the Rabin assassination, Netanyahu was completely shell-shocked, isolated, denounced, hated, despised. And there were a lot of people who said to Peres, call for an immediate election. On the basis of Yitzhak, Rabin, and I went together, but it was he who got elected in 1992. In his memory, and to continue his path and legacy and so on and so forth, I asked for a renewed mandate.
Oh no, I want to do it on my own.
And then you had the other group of people saying exactly what you just said, Amir, that, oh, no. People will say that you got elected on Rabin's blood, quote unquote.
That's a very important phrase you used. People will say.
People will say, yes. People will say. Name that people and where does he or she live. But you're right. He went on if you recall, a few months after he was inaugurated as prime minister, sworn in as prime minister, he made a speech at Bar Ilan University in which he said that he supports the idea of a Palestinian state.
Now this is Netanyahu 2009 already. We are not, but.
But no. He said that in late '96 and '97 as part of his commitment to
Oslo.
And you're right; he would not have been elected otherwise. His slogan was "Shalom v'bitachon" in
peace and security.
Only Netanyahu will bring a secure peace, which made sense to a lot of people because A, they weren't crazy about Peres. And B, they began seeing the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of the Oslo Accords. And it remains to be seen, of course, it's hypothetical, whether Rabin would have continued.
The political propaganda then and now is trying to depict the Labour Party and obviously parties to the left of the Labour Party as progressives, in American terminology, woke, Arab-loving, taking to heart Arab interests above those of Israelis, and not only Israelis but Jews.
That was always the.
Yes, this is of course rubbish, but this is what gets Likud elected.
True. It's also important that around that time, 1996, his first full year as prime minister, 1997, Netanyahu essentially gives up on any illusions he had about some kind of a new relationship with American Jewry. He figured out that American Jewry, by and large, between 70 and 75, even 80%, are what you'd call liberal Democrats.
This is the Clinton presidency, the second term, and Newt Gingrich is his ally.
You took the words out of my mouth. But before that, Netanyahu developed an aversion to what he called, and I heard this from him, the Upper West Side whining Jews who don't understand Israel.
West Side Manhattan.
The Upper West Side of Manhattan. The liberal Jews, they don't get it. And at the time, like you said, the Republican Party began a transformation. It began with Newt Gingrich. It then moved on to the Tea Party and then moved on to MAGA, the Trumpist cult and everything. But at the time, it was all about Newt Gingrich, a contract with America, and the rise of the evangelical Christians as the biggest, most dependable voting bloc in the Republican Party. Netanyahu immediately figured out that a coalition with the evangelicals and via their evangelicals with the Republicans in Congress would be much more beneficial than trying to develop a relationship with American Jews. So much so that it became, 20 years later, or 30 years later, it became a sort of a replacement theory.
Could you please explain? Yes, of course, Father Hagee and all of these preachers are or used to be Netanyahu's best
They still are.
bosom friends, right? But could you please explain how can the prime minister of the Jewish state be in cahoots with a religious group which sees Armageddon taking place in biblical Israel, Armageddon being Megiddo, of course, in north central Israel or Eretz Israel at the time, and in order to have the resurrection, the second coming, the Jews in Israel must perish. So what's the common denominator?
He's cynical enough to say, I will take their support now and wait
For the Messiah.
1,000 years until the end of days and Armageddon and all that happens. His entire lifestyle is inconsistent with the evangelical moral codes. But then again, so is Donald Trump's. But at that time, the establishment Republican Party was still very suspicious of Mr. Netanyahu. He became friends with Newt Gingrich. Yes, he became friends with all kinds of neoconservatives who still found a home and invaded almost every country on earth, depending on the week, on the day of the week. And he befriended them when they served in the Bush administration, the father Bush, and then Bush 43, George W. Bush, although he was not prime minister under George W. Bush. But he tilted Israel's entire idea of being a bipartisan issue toward the Republicans.
Thereby also splitting American Jewry.
Not splitting. 75% of American Jews in the recent election in November 24, 75% still voted for Democrats.
Okay, let me put in another way. Organized American Jewry, AIPAC and others, they tilted towards the Republicans.
Particularly AIPAC. AIPAC became an extension of Netanyahu. They defended him. They carried his bags.
So let me ask you, between 2000 and 2004 or so, you were the Consul General of the State of Israel in New York. Is one of the three main representatives to the United States, along with the ambassador to Washington and the UN permanent representative, who happens to share the same office building now with the Consul General. During that time, you were in touch with New York Senator Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
What did you hear from Hillary regarding Netanyahu? Because, as you well remember, during the Gingrich period and the Bill Clinton impeachment hearings, she talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy. Did she consider Netanyahu part of that conspiracy?
Not part of that conspiracy, but she was well aware of how Mr. Netanyahu tried to undermine Bill Clinton when he was president. By going to, you just mentioned him, Reverend John Hagee, going to meet him several times. There was a famous incident in 1997 in which Netanyahu came to see Bill Clinton and went to the Mayflower Hotel where Jerry Falwell was the moral majority was having a conference. He went there against all decorum. Now, as for the Consul General of Israel, but this is true also about the Consul General of Britain, of Germany, of other countries, is sort of an ambassador that deals with the U.S. media and politics outside the federal government. So in that respect, it wasn't just Hillary Clinton. On top of which, you may recall, Amir, in late 2002, the ambassador in Washington, David Ivry, former commander of the Israel Air Force, former Director General of the Defense Ministry, resigned as ambassador. He was unhappy with his relationship with Prime Minister Sharon, And Sharon, who was prime minister, and Shimon Peres, who was foreign minister, again,
In a unity government.
in a unity government that was formed in early in March of 2001. They failed to come up with a consensus candidate to be ambassador. Each presented a name, the other disqualified, and it went. And then they raised a glass and said, "Well, until next time." And there was no ambassador for almost 10 months, and so both would send me to Washington
On secret errands.
on secret errands, making me promise that I won't tell the other one, putting me in a completely impossible situation.
And this is in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq.
Exactly, that was the point. So my impression wasn't just Hillary Clinton, but a bigger circle of lawmakers in Washington. They, particularly the Democrats, they disliked Netanyahu. Now, some of them are sycophants, and they will hug him and kiss him and sing his praises. Some are still in the Senate and the House of Representatives. No names mentioned, but I think everyone knows. Hillary Clinton, in particular, disliked Netanyahu, and he was very afraid of her. She was a senator. He was out of office, but by 2009, I'm not in New York anymore, he becomes prime minister and she becomes secretary of state. And he was terrified that she is out to get him with vengeance. She was not. She was not. She was appointed Secretary of State by Obama to succeed as Secretary of State of the United States of America. She couldn't care less about Netanyahu.
At that time, Netanyahu wanted to send you to the United Nations
Because of Hillary Clinton.
in order to pacify her? Or why?
Yeah.
So what happened? What aborted your mission? Did Netanyahu ask you whether you will accept, but then it fizzled?
Okay. Netanyahu calls me in late 2008 and wants to meet. This is, by the way, the second time that I meet him in my life. Once he came to New York as Treasury Secretary, as Minister of Finance. And we met for a brief cup of coffee. We haven't kept in touch. I had no interest in, nor did he. And then he called me, and then he asked me to help him because because Obama was just elected in November 2008. And he said the following sentence. He said, "You speak Democratic and I speak Republican. I need to make some changes. I understand my mistakes from my previous, which I thought was a very heartening speech, except that he did not do anything that he pledged to do. I didn't ask for any position. He did not offer any position. Then he got elected. Once he got elected, he called me and said that he wants to meet again, and we met at the King David Hotel. He was prime minister already. And he offered me the ambassador in Washington. And I had reservations. I mean, you don't say no, but I asked him, I said, Washington is a city that operates on power and perceptions of power. If I'm not perceived as being inside your loop or your guy, very soon you will send your own emissaries and your own people.
Confidants. Yeah.
And I'll stay with a title that means nothing. I'd rather not. No, he said, no. I go back to what I told you. I need someone who speaks their language, the Democrats' language. A month or 2 months later, he calls me again and says, listen, I've given thought to what you said, and I think that you could be much more helpful to me and to the State of Israel as ambassador at the UN. I said, I think you're right, and that was that. A few months go by, and he changed his mind. What happened in between? A lot of rumors, I don't know. His wife was involved. Sheldon Adelson was involved.
What did they have against you?
Hillary Clinton. They thought he told Shimon Peres, who was then president, he told him at a dinner. Peres praised him for appointing me. Peres said, "Finally, you've learned the lesson not to surround yourself with your own ilk, but to broaden your or diversify your political circle. And he said that he's having second thoughts, major second thoughts. Peres asked him why, and he said that he's been told that that I will collude. I'm quoting from Peres, who quoted from him. I will collude with Hillary Clinton, his buddy, and Rahm Emanuel, who was then the president's chief of staff. I will collude with them to undermine him. And Peres said, what the hell are you talking about? If he's that close to Hillary Clinton, you should have appointed him yesterday, not wait until now. But how on earth could he collude with them? Why would
you know that this is, in Israel, this is not called paranoia, it's saranoia.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time. And to this day, I don't know who made that decision. And he decided against it. And you know what? I was disappointed for 24 hours. And in hindsight, he made the right decision. I would not have lasted with him as prime minister more than 6 months.
So you don't bear a grudge?
No, not at all. I bear a grudge for the style in which he did it. He didn't call me and said, listen, I've given it some thought. Let's stay in touch, maybe in the future. But right now, I don't see this happening. Thank you for your willingness to do this. Goodbye.
You know that this is his style. About that time, a year later, he was about to appoint the director of Mossad. And he called someone who happened to be the almost outgoing director of Shabak, the Internal Security Agency, on a Thursday and told him, okay, you're it. And on Saturday night, the person is certain that the next morning, Sunday morning, when the cabinet meets, the announcement will be made.
But you know what happens between Friday
afternoon and Saturday night? Weekends are dangerous for all prospective appointees when the family gathers around the Shabbat dinner table and they are filtering usually down the various names. Okay, back to Trump.
Yeah.
Trump and Netanyahu. They had a relationship going back to the first term. Then Trump made a disparaging remark about Netanyahu. He was disappointed that Netanyahu, as he should have, of course, called up Joe Biden and congratulated him on his victory, which Trump disputes to this day.
Yep.
And they started their term now, the second term for Trump. Netanyahu is still and back in office, apparently on a very high note. Or is it only the appearance?
I think it's only the appearance. I think they're coming to this relationship from completely different trajectories. Trump is on the ascent. He may burn out in 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months. I don't know. Netanyahu is in a descent politically, any way you look at it. Number two, con men. The one thing that con men hate most are con men. They hate to be lied to, and there's nothing more insulting to a con man, to a narcissistic con man, than being taken for a ride. And Trump thinks Netanyahu took him for a ride in the first term, not because he called Biden. By the way, I don't know what Trump's problem is. Netanyahu waited until the very, very last moment to congratulate Biden in 2020. In fact, it was there were only 5 heads of state who didn't call when Netanyahu called: Turkmenistan, Yemen, North Korea, Venezuela, and Israel. Maybe I'm wrong about one of them. No, but there were 2 incidents that Trump held a grudge that I think he does until today. The first is something that he made public. It was about the assassination or the elimination of Qasem Soleimani, the deputy commander, but the effective commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Netanyahu was all over the place promising logistical help, intelligence help, operational assistance, what have you. And when push came to shove, when America asked for certain modes of assistance, Netanyahu didn't pick up the phone. He said he sent someone to say that this can't be done, that this is too problematic, and he held that grudge. But after Soleimani was assassinated, Netanyahu was quick to claim some of the credit, saying that this is a good thing. We knew about what's going on. The second thing is toward the very end of the Trump presidency, as everyone remembers, he held a ceremony to sign the Abraham Accords.
That's in mid-September of 2020.
Mid-September of 2020, 2 months before the presidential election. And for him, it was a big deal. I mean, it was a far cry from the deal of the century in the Palestinian state, but in terms of a deal, it was a good deal from Trump's perspective.
And none of those four Muslim and Arab countries were really at war with Israel.
Number one. Number two, it was essentially an arms deal that the UAE, which later reneged on it because the U.S. demanded that they sever ties or at least decrease ties with China. But that's beside our point. And there's a ceremony at the White House, and Trump is very happy that he has something to show. And after the signing ceremony, Netanyahu gathers a group of settler leaders, some of his political sycophants, and members of the traveling press corps.
On whom he is still dependent, we see with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
All of those he's still dependent on. And tells them that when I come back Saturday or Sunday and there's a cabinet meeting, I am presenting to the cabinet a decision to annex a large swath of so-called Areas C. The Emiratis called Jared Kushner or other people as well and said, if he does not retract this, there's no arms deal and there's nothing. We cannot be seen as complicit in an annexation. Netanyahu told them that he got the green light from Trump. Trump called Netanyahu and basically told him, you have 2 or 3 hours. I don't know what you have 2 or 3 hours to retract it. And Netanyahu said that no. He wasn't expressing an actual, concrete, tangible paper that he will present to the cabinet. He was just talking about the idea that he intends to.
A notional annexation.
Okay. That made Trump look very bad in the eyes of the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Omanis, and even
the Moroccans.
The Moroccans and even the Saudis, who were not an integral part of the. Okay, fast forward to 2025. These are two different people coming from two different angles. Netanyahu, it's the scorpion and the frog. Netanyahu is going to manipulate, deceive, and try to con Trump because this is what he does. Trump, I think, has already been conned into implicitly saying that Israel can renew the war in under certain conditions.
Why? Trump is obviously angling for a Nobel Peace Prize. Why would he want the Gaza war to be resumed?
I don't think he wants it to be resumed, but I think he bought into Netanyahu's rhetoric about your plan, your ingenious plan to make a Riviera out of Gaza and all the jokes that accompanied that, with the Mar Jabalia and the...
From the Riviera to the sea.
From the Riviera to the sea and the Trump, okay. He convinced him that unless Hamas is defeated, which he has not succeeded in doing for 16 months, which is one of the reasons, if you recall, a year ago, Trump, then candidate Trump, called him a loser.
And told him to roll it
16 months is double the time that it took the Allies from the invasion of Normandy to liberate Berlin. Half the time. And supposedly the most sophisticated and most powerful military in the Middle East, comparably in the world, cannot eliminate and eradicate. These are Netanyahu's terms.
But you know...
so Trump is not unhappy with this. So I wouldn't count on his support.
But Trump, who was inaugurated on January 20th, and came out with a flurry of initiatives we won't go into, seemingly has already found a new toy, and that is the Putin-Zelensky brokerage.
I was just going to say that. If there is a Nobel Prize waiting for Trump, that's a big if, it'll probably come in Ukraine rather than in Gaza.
So we are left with Gaza, with Netanyahu, but with an uncertain, unpredictable Trump.
Look, just this week, Trump comes up with the following statement. If Hamas don't release all the hostages by noon Saturday, if I were Israel, I would break, violate or completely annul the ceasefire and renew the war.
But it's their decision.
Netanyahu has three different responses because he's confused, because while Trump can be criticized for making all these off-the-cuff remarks and then moving to another toy, Netanyahu is the indecision maker. He always tries not to make a decision. And so first Netanyahu said, we demand the 3 be released on Saturday as the agreement. Then he said 9. The 9 remaining, that all within 2 hours. The 9 remaining hostages should be released. Otherwise, Israel is no longer
remaining during this stage.
During this stage, out of the 33, of which 25 were alive, there are 9 remaining. We demand all of them. Then he completely subscribed to Trump's idea and said, if all of them are not released, then we're not bound by the agreement. Now, today is Thursday. I would imagine that on Saturday, 3 will be released. I mean, that's as good as an estimation as any. And the question is, what happens next? Because if Trump indeed wants to own the Gaza Strip, the war needs to end. So the war can end in 2 ways. Either you announce that it's over, or you renew it in order to end it again. You can't end the war without occupying the entire Gaza Strip. So here's an idea for you, Amir. Netanyahu renews the war, occupies the entire Gaza Strip, saying he needs to clear it because it's a promise that he made to Trump before he hands it over to Trump. And then a few months later, when Israel is stuck in the quagmire and loses dozens of soldiers for no reason whatsoever,
and the hostages,
and the hostages, and owns Gaza, you own the water, you own the health system, you own the food, you own the humanitarian aid, you own social services, whatever is left. Then he calls Trump and says, "It's ready to hand it over." And Trump says, "I'm busy. This week I'm busy with Ukraine, with Greenland, with Canada, with China, with immigration,
tariffs,
with whatever." That's the worst case scenario. Now Netanyahu is sophisticated and smart enough not to go there.
It's not the worst case for Netanyahu because he wants the war to go on rather than lose his coalition government.
Oh, absolutely. The death of Israelis is collateral damage for Netanyahu. They mean nothing to him. A few more days for him in power, meaning less time to be alive for dozens of Israelis, is nothing to him. That's the only motivating force.
That's quite a spectacle and a prognosis. And Alon, this seems like the beginning of a very interesting series of conversations. Hopefully, we will be able to continue.
Of all the podcasts in town, you had to step into mine.
Alon Pinkas, the Pine and Oak podcast on the Procast podcast platform. Thank you for sharing your experiences and ideas, and hopefully we will be back for another episode
Next time.
soon.